evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here to speak to you tonight and talk to you a little bit about branding of small businesses and new business ventures. I think when we think of brands, we often think of the big ones. We think of Coca-Cola and Microsoft and all of those really large, successful brands that spend enormous amounts of money on promotion and on marketing activities. But it's really not necessary to spend a huge amount of money in order to have a strong and powerful brand that's meaningful in relation to your organisation. So that's what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about tonight. And hopefully there are a few good things that you can take away from this that might help you in the development of the brands for your businesses. I'm a bit of a person who likes quotes. So Walter Landor is an expert on branding, and one of the quotes that I like from him is that he suggests that products are made in the factory, but brands are made in the mind. And I think oftentimes in the establishment of a business venture, we think a lot about the product that we're developing, and we think about its features and what benefits it will have for our customers, or we think about our service and how we can best deliver that service. But when it comes to branding, it's something more. It's not just about the products itself, but it's about how our brand or our business makes people feel. And it's about the perception of our business in the minds of consumers. So branding asks us then to take a different view of our business, and rather than just thinking about function and process and so on, which are of course important components, don't get me wrong, but it asks us to think as well in a different way about how we might be perceived by our consumers and how we can provide them with additional value beyond simply what the product offers. And I think we can probably all think of lots of examples of the ways that brands do that. Lorna Jane is a very successful Queensland businesswoman. And for those of you who aren't familiar with her and her line of activewear, she established her business a couple of decades ago and has since turned that into a multi-million-dollar empire. But you can buy activewear from Kmart. You could go to Kmart and spend much less than what you would pay for her line of activewear. But yet people are still prepared to pay that additional amount of money. Why? Well, it's not just about the product, although, yes, arguably, because of her background in fashion design, and she won ROQ Fashion Design Awards and so on and so forth, that gives credibility to her brand. And that's without question. But she's built something more along with that brand. And in terms of her logo, she's got this sort of move, nourish, believe. I think I've got that right. I hope I've got that right.
Yeah, I'm not
sure. Something like that.
Something inspirational.
Absolutely, but there's symbols that she associates with her logo that reflect all of those elements. And what she's done with that brand is not just sell a line of fitness wear, but she's sold then something that empowers women to think about their health, and she's empowering people to think about fitness, and she's attaching all of these other elements to that. And not only that, she's also created a community. And so if you were to no longer purchase Lorna Jane activewear and you were in your Kmart activewear, then you wouldn't be seen as part of that tribe. You're not wearing that logo. And so what she's done is she's built a strong and powerful brand, not just based on selling lots of product, but in the value and what that product means to the consumers that she serves. So when we think about branding then asks us to think about the strategies that we develop for our business. And obviously this requires a significant amount of time investment to think of what does our brand mean. Because it goes beyond simply thinking of a brand name and perhaps a logo, but then to thinking far more deeply about what the strategy behind this brand will be. And this is just as relevant for new businesses as it is for existing businesses and even mature businesses. Because you will, regardless of what stage your business is in, there is still opportunity to develop and enhance that brand in a deeper way. And why would you go about doing that? Well, we know from research that brands enable us to develop relationships with our customers. It enables us to have a basis on which we can develop something that resonates with consumers, just like the Lorna Jane example that I gave you. And so we can then connect with our customers on a deeper level. We're not just selling product but they're then becoming part of our vision, and they're becoming connected to our organisation. And if they're connected to us, then they become loyal. And we all know that loyal customers are so extremely powerful for an organisation, because not only do loyal customers assure us of some level of return custom and therefore profit and revenue and so on, but also they may act as brand advocates for our business. And by talking about our business to their networks, they promote our business for us rather than us having to take the initiative and all of the communication in the market space about our brand being from us as the sender of the message, and rather they send on our behalf. And that adds credibility and all sorts of additional benefits. If we think of our business in terms of what our brand stands for, that also enables us to differentiate our brand. And so regardless of the type of business that you're in, it's important to think about how you're perceived in relation to the competition, and not just how you consider your business in relation to the competition, but how customers would perceive your business. And so, in many instances it could be that, when you look at cafes, well, cafes all sell coffee and cafes all, offer a very similar product. But what would it be about your cafe that would differentiate your business from others? Accountancy firms, and we all get our taxes done at various times of year. What differentiates one tax accountancy firm from another? Why do you, give your return custom to particular accountants? And a lot of that comes back to trust and loyalty and so on. But this aspect of differentiation is important, particularly if you operate a cluttered market where there's lots of competition and you're trying to gain new customers. So how would you be seen by those customers in relation to the competition? A strong brand also can protect our business from competitors and from other market factors. Again, coming back to that Lorna Jane example, people continue to buy her activewear because then perhaps others in their social circle are buying that activewear, and they recognise each other on the street, and they're training for their half marathons or whatever they might be doing in that activewear, and it protects your business from other entrants to the market. Obviously there are other business factors at play there, but if customers are loyal to your brand, they'll be less likely to switch. And a strong brand can also facilitate future brand expansion. So whether that's to go into franchising of a business venture, or whether it's looking to expand a brand into new markets or new product categories, or whatever the case may be. If you have a strong brand, then you can leverage that when you enter new markets. We're all familiar with just how tasty Cadbury chocolate is, and they have a very strong and loyal brand following. But the strength inherent within that brand, the equity, as we call it, that is inherent within that brand, then enabled them to move into other product categories beyond chocolate. Cake mixes and ice creams and so on, that weren't their traditional product category that they were based in. But you go through that chocolate aisle, or the chocolate cake aisle, or you go through the dairy aisle, and you see Cadbury branded chocolates, and you expect them to have that same level of quality, that same level of taste that you do from the original brand. So for all of those reasons, it's worth considering the investment that you're putting into who you are as a brand and what you stand for. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But I'm not going to ask each of you individually to speak about what your brand values are, but rather perhaps just to take a moment to reflect on and think about your business and to think about your brand and why you established that business and what values you have. Because if we're true to those values, then that can help us to develop our brand in a deep and meaningful way. It's a little bit like saying you can't pretend to be something you're not. Sustainability is a bit of a buzzword at the moment. A lot of brands, a lot of businesses think, well, there's a lot of money to be made in the sustainability space. If we jump on that bandwagon, there's money to be made. But over time, you would very quickly see which businesses actually hold the values of sustainability as core and true to their business mission, as opposed to those businesses who are just in it for a quick buck. So, knowing your values is important. Sorry. only then your values, but if you were to ask one of your customers how they would describe your brand, what do you think they would say? What would be some of the key words that you expect would come to mind when they were describing your business or describing your brand? And hopefully they're positive words. But that gives us a starting point to then think about brand development and where we can take it from there. Now, there's a few, I'm a bit of an example person, so I like to talk about, show things through examples. And there's another few businesses that I think really exemplify strong branding. And they're all very different businesses. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them. But they're all businesses that were established in Australia and have all become extremely successful. Anyone who has young kids would know the Smiggle brand. Is anyone familiar with the Smiggle brand? Yeah. Or am I the only one with young kids who has handed over a lot of money to Smiggle? If you were to describe Smiggle, how would you describe that brand? Expensive.
Colourful.
Colourful. Fun. Consistent.
Engaging.
Well, they are very colourful, as they need to be. Because when you think about a brand, it's important to think not just about who you are, but also who your target market is, of course, like with all marketing. And so it's important to think about both who you are and what you want to be, but also thinking about the market and how you will serve that market and what their needs are. So we see here, Smiggle is a stationery company, basically, and they target children. Now, they've since become an extremely popular children's stationery brand. But you mentioned fun and you mentioned engaging and you mentioned colourful, and you can see that reflected in their branding. Fun, colourful, exciting, and so on. It's through the colours that they use. It's through their brand name as well. But it's linked to those values, and it gives us then a basis to grow that brand in terms of its equity. And then we have Oz Harvest. Does anyone know anything about Oz Harvest? You might be able to read very quickly and see it there. Who could describe or tell us a little bit about, for those who aren't familiar, what Oz Harvest do?
All I know is that they supply fresh produce, and they're Australian and they're pretty fresh. That's all I remember, but I know that they're good.
They're a collection agency fundamentally, so the link between the homeless and the actual restaurants and clubs, etc., where they've got to collect old food and then deliver it to
Absolutely.
basically the homeless crowd, so they become that conduit. So the major law changed where
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the major law changed in the handling of food, where there was the opportunity, because prior to that, most manufacturer or kitchens had a disposable the product, they couldn't distribute it.
That's right.
So it was basically that safe food handling law changed. Therefore, they were able to kickstart out of, I think they came out of ACT somewhere there.
They came out of Sydney originally.
Sydney ACT, and they grew from there exponentially.
And they have a base here on the Gold Coast now as well.
Yeah.
So that's Oz Harvest. So essentially, Oz Harvest was a business that was established by a woman named Ronnie Khan in Sydney, and she established this business because she wanted to reduce food waste, and that was her original goal. She recognised that your major supermarkets, your restaurants, your bakeries, so on and so forth, were all throwing away all of this usable food at the end of the day, when it was still edible. So food that was perhaps slightly imperfect or day-old bread, those sorts of things. And she thought, how can we address this? How can there be another solution? So it was originally born out of environmental concerns. But she then looked to a different solution, and she thought, absolutely, as you mentioned, how can I act as a conduit between collecting this produce and then passing it on to charity, so it could be used by charities and groups that serve the homeless and so on and so forth. So not only would she have an impact in terms of sustainability and reducing food waste, but that it would then have a positive impact on another group. And what's interesting about this brand, and absolutely she had to have laws change and all sorts of things as a result, because of concerns about liability from those that were donating those food products. And there are still some categories of food that can't be donated, but that's processing, that's neither here nor there. And she's got competitors now. So there's another one called Second Bite. Oz Harvest is associated with one of the major retailers, Second Bite is associated with another, because obviously, you know, there are benefits for the organisations that donate as well, because they no longer have to dispose of that food that they won't sell and pay for those costs. But what's interesting about this brand is that typically when we talk about sustainability or when we think of reducing food waste, it's in somewhat negative terms. It's, you know, we need to stop doing this bad thing because then it will have this negative, you know, and it's all bad. So we need to stop being bad. But what she's done is she's transformed this particular issue of reducing food waste and made it a positive issue, that it's having a positive impact. And her intention all along for this brand was for it to be an optimistic brand. That yes, it was about sustainability and that was a core value, but also optimism. And you see that reflected in the colours. So the yellow was a very strategic choice, linking back to those values of optimism and helping having a positive outcome. The third brand that I wanted to mention too, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, is an online company, again, out of Australia, called Vinomofo. Who's heard of Vinomofo? A few of you. A few wine drinkers in the audience. What could you tell me about Vinomofo?
Vinomofo is another contest, like they have, but these guys are a group of tech-savvy young people who love wine, and then into passion and tribal in the way they present their wine and sell it.
Absolutely.
So they're followers more than buyers.
Absolutely. And so they've worked on developing a brand community. And what's interesting about this particular company, so Vinomofo, online wine merchants. And there's lots of...
As well.
Sorry?
Exclusivity as well.
Absolutely.
Around the brand.
There is. But this particular brand recognised that there was a gap in the market, that there was lots of young people that liked wine, but typically wine experts are considered to be a little older, perhaps a little wealthier, a little more conservative, and if you don't fit that mould, then it's an intimidating group to try to find yourself be part of. So this group of young people thought, well, there's an opportunity here, because they loved drinking wine and they wanted to develop a wine community that was cheekier and, you know, more irreverent and cooler and funkier and all that sort of thing. And again, you know, some of the colours in their logo reflect that, but even the way they describe their brand. They wanted to unite a tribe with lots of wine, maybe lots of wine, with a love of wine and food and this adventure called life. And so we can see some of those values coming through there as well, in the way they describe themselves, that this is a brand that's about bringing people together and adventure and fun and so on and so forth. Reflected in a lot of their branding. And remember, these were all startups from Australia, these businesses. So in thinking about that then, I think that helps us to think a little more deeply about, well, how would we like to be seen by our customers, and how can we differentiate ourselves in the marketplace? And of course, one of the other key components, one of you mentioned consistency early in regards to Smiggle. One of the key components of a strong brand is having that level of consistency across every encounter that a customer or stakeholder or member of the public or whoever they may be, with every contact that they have with our brand, that they get the same feeling, that there is a consistent message across all of these. And so, you know, whether we're talking about advertising or whether we're talking about, you know, the signature on an email or what's reflected on a website or the customer service that you receive and the manner in which you speak to someone who's, you know, represents that organisation, we need to have consistency across all of these elements in order to develop a strong brand. We can't be saying one thing to one group and something else to a different group, because that would then be inconsistent. So, you know, across all of those elements, and not just in terms of imagery, but in terms of thinking back to those values and what we hope to stand for is important. So then, to introduce a little bit of academic theory to our discussion on branding, one of the most seminal pieces of research in the branding literature is by a scholar named Kevin Lane Keller, and he developed what's called the consumer-based brand equity pyramid. The intention of this pyramid is to show how equity in a brand, or the value of a brand, is enhanced by thinking of brand development through these stages and from a consumer perspective. So it urges us to think about, well, if we want to develop a strong and powerful brand that's meaningful, then there are stages that we need to take our brand through. And that first stage is then thinking about, well, who are you? What is your brand? And obviously that's your brand name, but it also urges you to think about, what category do you see yourself in and what value are you offering? And so that's the very first step, is to think about what we call brand salience. It also comes back to how well known you are. So knowing who you are and what category you're in, then helps us to think about, well, how can I develop as an objective in this stage a strong level of awareness for my brand? Because if people don't know who you are, then they're not going to buy your product or book your service or whatever the context may be. So the very first step in brand development is developing a really strong level of brand awareness. But just because people know who you are doesn't mean that they're then going to buy your product. That's just the first step. And even for established businesses, you might not necessarily be as well known amongst your target market as you think you are. So again, that's something that can be developed through the life cycle of a brand. We continue to look at developing our salience. It's not just something that happens when we launch a brand. From there then though, we need to look a little bit more deeply about our brand in terms of what is the meaning of our brand. What are we in terms of performance and in terms of imagery? So performance would be in terms of the product or service that you offer, and do you deliver on time, and what are the features and benefits of the products that you offer. If it's a physical product, you might be thinking about design. If it's a service, then the manner in which you deliver that service, and whether it's what type of service it is and how it fits within that category. Performance. But then imagery also comes into this category. And imagery isn't just about what you do, but it's about the image that surrounds that. So if we were to talk about Apple as a brand, we might mention things like their streamlined design and user friendliness and so on. These are some of their performance features. They're design products that are user friendly, that look good, they're expensive, and so on. But when we talk about imagery, that's something different, and this might be related to the types of people that you expect would buy Apple products, and that comes into the imagery. It's got nothing to do with whether the products work, whether they meet your needs, whether they're user friendly. It's something else. This is why when you see cosmetics brands like Maybelline will use, and they're more inexpensive brands, will use younger, more contemporary movie stars and models and so on, and then your more expensive brands, your Estee Lauders and so on, will use more sophisticated, older actors, etc. in their promotions, because they're trying to develop that imagery association. It's not whether or not the foundation works well or the colours of the lipsticks that they sell, it's about the imagery. Who uses this brand? And that then enables your consumers to identify whether or not they match that. Imagery, smiggle, fun, colourful, etc. Yes, of course their pencils are colourful, but the fun is something that's different to the performance. And so this is the second step then, to think about the meaning that's associated with the brand. It could be the heritage of the brand and the history that it has. And that might be something that you can use to enhance the meaning of your brand. Bundaberg Rum does this all the time. They play to their heritage. Forex, sorry, in Queensland, and we're talking about Queensland beverages. Again, it's not about the taste of the beer. There's a lot of imagery associations there as well. And they use that in their communications. After the 2011 floods, They played very heavily to that in their communications, saying we're part of you, we're part of the community. That took them up to here. But in between, we've got feelings and judgment. So the third step, beyond building meaning, is to think about then what's the response that we hope the consumers will have to our brand. What will their judgments be? And what will their feelings be? So judgments comes back to things like, oh, we're perceived as good quality or not. But feelings, well, this is when we start to say, oh, I love that brand. I'm excited by that brand, and so on. And anyone who buys Lorna Jane products, has shopped through Vino Mofo, has bought Smiggle, would know that there is a lot of positive feelings associated with that brand. And here, once we start to develop that, you can see that you start to develop resonance. And resonance is that highest level, about the relationship you develop with your customer. What about what happens between them and you? And that's really important to then think about at that third step. But we can also think about this in terms of our communications and our promotional tools and how we use various promotional tools. Because some perhaps will be better for developing awareness. If all we're looking at doing is having more people know who we are, then some promotional tools will work better for doing that. And the messaging might be different than if we are trying to grow feelings and so on towards that brand. Perhaps we might look at PR and look at associations and other sorts of tools as well. So thinking of those steps and thinking of it in that manner is important. Another couple of points in regards to this as well. When we think about communications tools and linking how we promote our business to branding theory, it's important to be aware that not everyone who becomes aware, it's important to know that not everyone who becomes aware of our business will be a customer. And I think that's obvious to all of us. We know that. Not everybody who knows who we are will buy from us. But there are some stages that we can go through in order to try to encourage people to move through from this stage of being aware through to becoming a customer and ultimately a loyal customer. And we can think of it in terms of thinking, feeling, doing, or cognitive processes that we go through, becoming aware, developing knowledge about a brand or a business, through to then this stage of feeling, or the affective stage, where then liking and preference become developed, through to then the actual purchase or the conative stage, the doing stage, where they actually buy from our brand. And again, in different types of messaging in terms of promotion, and different tools might be able to be used at different stages. A lot of businesses are looking at being in the social media space, and we talk a lot about social media in some of the courses that I teach. And one of the big things I like to say to my students is to think about social media in terms of what you hope to gain from being there. That it's not just about having a Facebook page and then, perhaps having a sponsored post that then gets spread around, so lots of people become aware of your business maybe. But then what are you doing with it from there? What are you communicating within that space that suggests that consumers will start to like your business? And so that becomes then the nature of the content that you post is linked to that. And then perhaps if people start then engaging more with your social media presence because they like the information that you're posting, it's relevant to them. You're not just trying to sell them stuff, but you're giving them information that's relevant to their lives, then they start to develop a deeper connection with your brand. They like you more. Maybe then they'll develop a preference. Finally, then maybe you can convert them through trial into purchase, and you might incentivise that through some offers, through social media and so on as well. But it's about being strategic about how you use all of the communication tools that are available to you, not just social media, but advertising and so on and so forth as well. Actually, I've got a little one-pager that I'll pass around in a moment. And it just sort of brings together some of what I've spoken about and hopefully gives you some points to take away to think about that might be relevant to you and your business. But when it comes to promotion, we break this up into 4 broad areas. advertising, publicity, sales promotion and personal selling. And then of course there are other tools, and there's direct marketing and all sorts of new and exciting ways that we can engage with customers. But when we think about these different tools and then we think about their relevance to developing a branding strategy, that asks us to think about these tools in different ways. And so you might have a small business, and it could be a business that, you know, perhaps you've established yourself as a personal trainer, and you say, well, my market is going to be perhaps young mothers looking at getting back in shape after having children, perhaps. In thinking about that, then you're going to be thinking about, well, where do they go and what do they do? Because that's where you want to be. And that's where you then need to start thinking about, how do I make that group aware of my brand? By being where they are and where they go. And you can do that online and offline. You can even do that in a very, small local context. And local fitness trainers often target local schools, local kindergartens, and they have newsletters that you can place advertisements in very inexpensively. So it's not about a big budget advertising campaign. It's about thinking about how you can target your market well, to make them aware of your brand, but also to help build them through those stages of not just knowing about you and that you have this product to offer, but moving them through stages of liking and developing, having feelings towards your brand. And that's where PR can come in. So you're looking for ways that you can engage with your community in a way that's relevant to your target market. And there's all sorts of tools that we can use in terms of PR and community engagement and sponsorships and endorsements and all sorts of things that are even accessible to very small businesses. It could be that you offer free advice that's in your area of expertise that helps to grow your business or your brand. And so if you're a professional services, tax accountant, whatever the case may be, HR professionals, that might be one way that you can grow your market amongst networks that you see would be favourable to gaining new customers. And because you're doing something for them, then they see that as being something that's not just about attracting a sale. Lots of other things that you can do in that similar vein that gets you to think about, publicity is not just, can I get mentioned in a newspaper, which there is very much potential to do so, but other tools and things that you can use as well. Small events perhaps where you gather people together. Is your premises available, can be used in a way that engages and supports your community, whatever the case may be. In terms of sales promotions, of course, they're the way that we convert our customers, or the encouragement that we use to induce a sale. And there's lots of different ways that we can do that, and bonuses and trials and special offers and so on and so forth. But again, it's about how you use that strategy and how it links to developing your brand. And not just making that a free-for-all that you offer to everyone, but being really targeted about how you go about doing that. Perhaps even offering some sort of sales promotion that acts as an inducement for a loyal customer to share information about your brand with their networks and advocate on your behalf. And that might be a way that you target your sales promotion so that it's more cost effective for your business, but you've then created a referent, someone who will refer your brand on. And of course, personal selling and direct marketing as other tools as well that you can use to engage with individual consumers or with trade partners and others. But in all of these, it's important to come back to that original thought of what are your values and how would you link your promotional activities to those values. Booktopia is another Australian company. It's an online book merchant, started on a dime, and has now been listed on the Australian stock market. Very successful business. One of their PR activities is to donate a percentage of the sales of books to a charity that supports Indigenous communities and is designed to support literacy amongst young Indigenous Australians. It links to their values. They're a bookstore. So it's not then seen as something that's tokenism or something that isn't credible, it's meaningful, and it links to their values and then makes their brand stronger. But of course, above all, whenever we're communicating and coming back to those touch points and what you mentioned about Smizzle earlier, it's important to think about a few key elements when it comes to creating communications. We don't just create a communication for one moment in time. We need to think about the message that we send and how it relates to a broader message that continues. that is consistent, that links our communications tools together so that we get the biggest bang for our buck, and is coherent to our market. And so, we're not just thinking about what we do in terms of, perhaps PR, but thinking about how that would link then to a sales promotion and to other activities, so they're all working together to achieve the same goal. So finally, another quote. But when we think about branding, it's important to define what your brand stands for, what its core values are, and what your tone of voice would be, and then to communicate consistently with your market in those terms. And in doing so, and with a thought to the development of your brand through the strategies that we've mentioned. Hopefully that then creates a stronger and more powerful brand that has equity within it and adds value to your business as well. And I went a little bit longer than I'd intended. I hope I didn't bore you senseless. I'll pass this around.
We're going to have a Q&A. Would you like to do?
You're most welcome to.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
I think we should really find another phrase or a name for businesses that brand doesn't mean anything to them. Like, for example, we are in services.
Yes.
Brand, in my opinion, sporting, fashion, automotive, food, you could identify, you could say brand, and therefore it become top of mind, brand equity, character, identity, whatever you call it. But that's brand. But when it comes to businesses like services, accountant, business consultant, broker, whatever, I think there's something else that really applies to businesses, but not brand. Because then, for example, imagery and residence, all that, and the motion. I think if there's something academically or theoretically or in business community, we should find another term that really business people will like us will get excited about, and not being kind of, when you talk brands, actually, in business, the only way to build your brand business is face to face. Direct selling. That's the only way. Because otherwise, you're going to Nike overnight. You could create a new logo, and you could be popular because they spend $50 million globally. But small businesses can't spend any money on branding. You can't spend any money on branding, really.
But you
But
still
you
have
could
a
say-
brand strategy.
But no, I think it's not just brand. In my opinion, honestly, it's not brand. But once it's brand, it's nothing. I honestly believe it's like earning your stripes in business. You earn your stripes in business. And therefore, people will give you become trusted advisor, you become something, but not brand.
Well, see, I don't disagree with you, but if we were to think about some of the feelings and so on that are associated with services, when you think about an accountant or a professional service, there are feelings that are associated with those businesses. Those feelings are trust.
I know, but
And
I'm
things
just
like that. And so
talking about the
that's
brand
what you're working on
as a brand
developing.
power. I'm talking about brand that reaches, brand that becomes like global, for example.
Yeah.
That's a brand.
Yeah.
But there is another term yet to be defined that actually applies to small business that is not brand, but something else, in my opinion, honestly. It's not, and as academic, as I have less respect for people in the academia, I think you'd come up with another term that would really get us more excited.
Fair enough.
Honestly, I think you're the one to do it.
I don't know about that. No pressure. But that's certainly food for thought, because a lot of the literature does focus on large brands, on big multi-million-dollar brands in terms of brand development. But at the same time, I think there is applicability even to small businesses when you think about those stages of development. And I think a lot of businesses think, well, branding is about registering a business name and then finding customers. And in between there, you're right, it's particularly for small businesses. It's about the relationships that you develop. But that's branding too. It's just
but it's not brand.
it's because it depends on, fair enough. But you come back to your values as well, and you come back to what you hope to put the feelings that you hope your clients have when they think about your business. Whether they think of you as innovative, perhaps in terms of your professional service that you offer, or whether you're more conservative. There are differences in where review firms.
So if you're sitting at home and you said, I want to buy a product, for example, a sporting product, food, you would think of a brand. I will buy a shirt, I'll go to the country road, whatever. But if you want to think about a service, it's actually who you know, who's recommended to you. Therefore, that's the thing, it's that brand power, the character, the identity that's yet to be defined for a small business. And that's what I
It still
really.
applies though, part of it still applies. I'm the same as you. It'd be wasted to be spending $1 on advertising, etc., etc. So it's all word of mouth. But what you were saying, in parts, applies to that. As you said, if you've got values, etc., that builds it up, that person therefore gets confidence in you and is loyal to you. And as you say, if they're out somewhere, well, they're actually selling your business. So all of our business, 99.99999% of our business comes from people that have worked for us previously, that have changed organisations, or people that are actually telling about us.
I have an uncle who's got a successful landscaping business on the Gold Coast, and I don't think he's ever spent a cent on advertising. He sort of laughs off marketing a little bit. But really, what he has done with his business is what you said. It's personal selling, it's referrals, it's contacts, and that's come into it as well. There's the yellow pages in the beginning.
As a soup Nazi wouldn't spend any money on advertising.
I agree that all applies, but the name brand doesn't apply. I agree with you totally, but the actual name brand doesn't apply. There's another name with the same thing, with little change that applies to business. I think someone should work on it, honestly.
Maybe it's you, Emmett.
Question here.
It's like
The
your
research stream.
Like your pen, obviously, a lot of work we've been doing is around brand awareness, and then obviously your competitive, how people get into your market. But what we've been finding around that whole market analysis is understanding where businesses are and what market analysis have they done for their business to understand how they position it, and then from there create a brand. Because that's sort of all interrelated. I don't know how you feel about that in terms of, suppose, answering some of those questions as well.
No, absolutely. There's sort of a couple of schools of thought in marketing, and they're not really opposed, but there's what we call a brand orientation and a market orientation. So when you think of a brand orientation, that's thinking internally about who you are and what you stand for, your values, and so on and so forth. The market orientation is, a lot of traditional marketing theory is about, looking outwards, find a target market, meet their needs, exactly. How do you position in relation to that target market? But what's important is to think about really both.
Yes.
To think about, knowing who you are, as well as then how that matches with the target market that you're aiming for. And, that's only really an emerging area too.
That's right. And we always find that whole positioning around that market analysis has been a major shortfall across most businesses we're touching. Sales and marketing being number two, and that whole marketing analysis.
But not having a clear understanding of the market.
Most people don't do it. There's a huge percentage now.
Because there is
Just do it.
my dad, when I was in my late teens, established a business in Noosa, and it was a cafe, and he called it Love's Cafe, obviously that was the surname, and it had all of the textbook, it was the right location, and they had the right menu, and the aesthetics of everything seemed to be as it should be. And they went along quite well for a little while, but eventually that business didn't succeed. And in talking to him later, they didn't really think a lot about exactly who they would target. They just sort of thought cafe in Noosa and people will come. The one next door was established around the same time and is still a profitable business and exists today.
Wholesome is a state point for that. In Germany, we got the whole position around brand, around the populace, around innovation, and people want to live there. So you've got to creating an environment where people want to be. So you aren't disrupting it.
Yeah.
So if you can create that environment where people want to be, that's your brand, and you can actually target and put savings for applicable products in that group, and then you can brand the hell out of it.
Yeah. But it's about knowing who
Lots
you
of
are
both.
as well as the market that you serve. Well, you've got to have both.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you don't have something you stand for. You're just trying to please everybody, and we know that never works if you're trying to please everybody. But also, not being so focused on inwards, so focused on what you want to do that you've missed sight of who that would appeal to.
And I got a brochure today from Laura Jane, and it was interesting, and as you said, she's been around for a few decades, but she's known her target audience for a long time, but she's actually expanded on that and accelerated on that to the fact that the marketing information I got today from her was she's now targeting pregnant women. But she's never done that before, so she's got all this gear for pregnant women. And I'm like,
Qantas's latest,
clever.
one of Qantas's latest ads for a
Well, she can
streamliner.
do that, yeah.
Instead of saying, they're all that feels like home to me and it's always got the Australian focus and so on, in one of their latest ads, the girl's going home to England. She's living in Australia. So that's how far they're then able to take that brand, that it's no longer about just being the Australian airline, but it's the feeling of bringing people home and the safety and the security and all of those attributes they always held true.
When I think of brand, I think it's a stock of knowledge, a stock of information held by people. When I think of reputation, I think the same thing.
Yep.
Now, can you distinguish between brand and reputation?
That's a good question.
Well, I think it might unlock the concern of the fact.
Yeah.
It's about knowledge people have about you and your services and your quality and so on. But I've always thought brand, reputation, more or less.
Brand based on,
When we talk reputation, oftentimes we talk about that in terms of corporate communication, corporate links, and it's not two-way. Reputation is how we're perceived, without being an expert in that area. But branding, like the sort of the holy grail of brand equity and having a strong, valuable brand is the relationship that consumers have with the brand. And I don't think you necessarily have to have a relationship to have a reputation. So you're right, reputation's important, absolutely, but that's only one part, I think, of branding. It doesn't quite capture that relationship level.
Does one drive the other?
Yeah, reputation is absolutely the driver for
Brand.
a strong brand needs to have a strong corporate reputation. And that links to that corporate side as well, and the value and how you perceived it, not just from a consumer perspective, but in terms of finance.
So how is there any differences when you're talking about a personal brand? Say, for example, somebody like Russell, like he's got two businesses really well. He's got two focuses. One is as an activist and one is as a comedian.
Yeah.
But say if you're looking at the activist, how do you think about brand when it's a person from, how's that different to a company?
Well, there's a lot of literature that follows a similar vein, and there is a growing stream of literature in terms of personal branding, absolutely. And we see movie stars and celebrities do it, but also entrepreneurs. Richard Branson, has worked for years on his brand. And what's interesting is that he doesn't attach his name to his businesses. So you've got Virgin, but then you've got Richard Branson, but yet his personality echoes throughout the image of that brand and gives it sort of that integrity and what you know that brand to be in terms of innovation and so on. But yeah, he still very much maintains his personal brand. I think the whole idea of having people be aware of who you are and then being true to your values and thinking about the reactions that people would have to your personal brand in whatever business context you use that is important. And even celebrities build relationships with their followers, and so that's personal branding but follows that same strategy. So absolutely it's equally.
Just to extend on that, I'm one of the teachers here at the ERHR, so we do the first year students with work and employability, and I started talking to them about their personal brand because they had to do an e-portfolio, LinkedIn profile. So I talked to them about your brand online because what makes you better than the next person who's applying for a job. So how do you stand out? What makes you look better? And what's your personal brand? So we really started talking about that with them.
And you can extend it further by suggesting they take self-marketing, which is our third year course that's following them.
It was about going out and doing internships and making yourself better and getting to know people to go networking. And
absolutely. And that's what we have a third year course that's just been developed in marketing and self-marketing, and it very much follows that vein in terms of thinking about who are you, what are your values, because whilst not being a HR expert, we know that if we have an alignment between the values of our staff and the values of the organisation, then we're more likely to retain those staff and they're more likely to be motivated. So if you know what your values are as a potential employee, then you're better able to look for organisations that would match that. So, absolutely self-branding and is really important to consider.
Just going back to your point before about Richard Branson and then I guess comparing that to Lorna Jane, do you have a personal opinion on whether it is a good idea to attach your personal name to your brand?
I think there's pros and cons to both. The danger with associating a person with a brand is that person, and we're all fallible, right? We all may occasionally do the wrong thing. So if the person is continually attached to the brand, there is risk to that.
Nick Smith.
Sponsorships and endorsements of celebrities and all sorts of things as well. It's about risk management, I think. Yeah. See, Lorna Jane was a fitness instructor originally, and then went into fashion design. So there was a link between her knowledge and skill set and the brand. So it makes sense for that to have then happened. But there's lots of other examples, of course, of very famous entrepreneurs who are not, didn't use their name in their business. And perhaps that comes back to somewhat, what you plan to do with the business in the future as well, if it's something that you plan to sell off. There's a famous hairdressing chain in Southeast Queensland. I think they're Australian wide. Not Stefan, the other one. I can't remember. No, that's a newer one. And it was similar to Stefan, and they were around for a long period. John LaCourte. And the name of the brand was based on him. And he then franchised that brand. And so there were John LaCourte salons all over Queensland. But he's getting older now and is looking at getting out after he has other businesses as well. But it creates an interesting challenge then, because that business was so heavily associated with that person that then what becomes of it later if that person is no longer associated with it. And, I think more business planning, future forward decisions about, well, what do you plan to do with your business in the future? Is it something that you'd like to sell off, or you'd like your children to inherit, or is it short-term, long-term, those sorts of things come into some of those decisions too.
Any more questions? Because I think it's a great opportunity to find out and get some answers.
As I understand through your talking, I thought SMEs and small business don't believe in branding because they think it's expensive. Brand development is expensive. But the thing is, we should, train them that, the more important thing for brand development is brand strategy. And brand strategy is more important than, branding budget. And this is the thing, SMEs should be, aware that, they should focus on brand strategy, not, think about at the first time, they should think about, a strategy development regarding their brand. And these days, because of existence of, for example, social media technologies, it's affordable for lots of small business that develop their brand through different social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and other social media. I faced this problem in Malaysia. I did research regarding SMEs in Malaysia, and I faced the exact problem that the gentleman there mentioned. SMEs don't believe in brand because they think it's expensive, and I think we should work on this specific point and aware them regarding.
And that's a really good point, and I hope that some of the points that are on that sheet help you to think about it in that way as well, because absolutely it doesn't have to be expensive. Obviously your time is money, and it takes your time to think about strategy development, but it doesn't have to be an expensive exercise by any means. But a brand is more than a logo. A brand is more than a name. It's about the values that you have and how you would like people to respond to your business and how you want to be seen in the minds of consumers. And so, giving some time and thought to that hit on a really interesting point there actually, because there is research that's emerging that's looking at what's happening currently, and absolutely it was the case that we would only look to brands we knew and brands we trusted and brands that we were familiar with. There is still a space for that, and it depends on the risk associated with the purchase of the product. So, you know, if it's a cup of coffee and we hate the coffee and it doesn't taste good or whatever, we've lost a few dollars, but we haven't, you know, lost anything significant, and we call that involvement. But there is certainly, you know, an appetite at the moment for you know, variety seeking. That people are looking for something new, something interesting, something that's different, and that's such a great time for small businesses. I think you see all of these boutique breweries popping up and cafes and, you know, and so on, and people are willing to try the unknown. Like I said, moderated somewhat perhaps by, you know, the risk involved in the purchase. It's a really good point though.
Do you call that disruption?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. It's disruptive. Yeah, and it makes the big brands sort of, absolutely, they have to then see, well, how can we be seen still as trustworthy, but innovative as well? So how can we tap into that consumer need for something that's new and exciting and different, whilst also staying true to our values? It is a shake-up.
On one of your first slides, you had about 6 different points like brand, resonance, connecting with your customer. One of them was around protecting from competitors and other marketers. I guess what my question is around that. What do you see as the top things that you could be doing to protect your brand? Or when you see the companies that are doing that well, like what are they doing in that space? I have no idea what that would actually
Yeah, no, fair
like
enough.
physically.
I guess the point there was really that what does having a strong brand do for your business?
So it does.
So by you know, thinking about your brand in this way and developing, what will it do? And one of the outcomes of that is, you know, yes, it might prevent switching behaviour, but it might also mean that, you know, perhaps in periods of economic downturn, if your brand has loyal customers and is valued, it might protect your brand somewhat for that. So you might still very good, okay.
So I think my job is to move a vote of thanks to Anita. Anita's one of my valued colleagues. I've only known her for about 5 years, but we certainly have a devilish rapport. Clearly, this is about the first time I've ever seen her actually teaching, if you like. I've seen her in administrative roles. She's very good at that too, and I'm very impressed. I've got lots of questions. I could learn a lot. So on behalf of you all, I'd like to thank Dr. Anita Love for her sterling effort here tonight, and thank her in the appropriate way.
You got yours last time.
Thank you very much. I apologise too. It's the first time I've actually been filmed, you know, live streamed and these sorts of things. And much as I like to think that I'm pretty savvy with technology, I'm a bit of a photophobe and videophobe. So I was a little nervous, and it's, you know, a different situation too when you're presenting in front of your most senior and esteemed colleagues. I hope I did okay.
I think you've been asked to choose the winner of.
Yeah, we're going to have another bottle, a lucky business card draw, and we're giving a booby prize tonight, aren't we?
Yes, Stuart.
Yeah, we're giving away Stuart on a date. No, we're just kidding.
Yeah, I'll take it.
He's very good at dishwashing.
He's very well house trained.